Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Anasora Intenso Yeast Inoculated Processed Ethiopia from Corvus Coffee Roasters. And there's the cup right there. And Corvus, based out of Denver, Colorado. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel numerous times before. A coffee roaster that's quite popular with you guys, and one I would consider to be one of the better Denver-based coffee roasters. I'm currently outside of the location on Broadway, which is the only location I've actually ever been to. I know they have a second location in the Denver Tech Center, and at this point they might have a third location. I'm not entirely sure. But the Broadway location is a location I'm quite familiar with, as I used to swing by this location on my way to my first job after grad school. What I've really noticed about Corvus over the years is that they have really started to skew a lot more towards the experimental coffees, as so many of their newsletters offer more unique and experimental coffees as a whole. This is an example of that, so definitely got it and looking forward to discussing it. And for anybody that's never been to one of Corvus's coffee shops, they have changed over the years. So originally they used to have just a couple of pour-over options and a drip, but when I was there at the shop today, they had one drip option, which was a Bolivia, and then they had 4 pour-over options. I know one was a Colombia. I don't remember what the other 2 were, but this one caught my interest because of the experimental processing. Corvus is a light medium American for the roast profile. With all of that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. And it's kind of funny because I don't review many of their more standard offerings. This would be considered something that's more of their standard offerings. I do tend to go for some of their more higher end offerings, as noted by Estribi and Zoro, which were, I believe, our last Corvus reviews, actually, funny enough. This one right here is interesting because it definitely does appear to liven up a little bit more as it has cooled down. But interestingly enough, I believe they served this to me a little cooler than I was expecting, because when I took my first sip, it was a lot cooler than I expected. So I think they used a lower brew temperature for this coffee, and as a result, the first couple of impressions weren't quite as vibrant as I think I was expecting. The listed descriptors for this coffee were something along the lines of mango candy, and I think the other thing they had was bergamot, which will make a lot of sense when we kind of discuss this coffee, because the citric aspect of this was by far the most pronounced characteristic to it. But I think I was really hoping for and expecting so much of that sort of mango vibrancy, a lot of sweetness, but even then, it was slightly more tame than I think I was expecting, and that possibly could be attributed to the lower brew temperature. Coffee definitely has opened up as it has cooled down. So let's go ahead and put up that tasting wheel so you can see what I was getting. All right, we have 4 level 4s. So let's run through those real quick. Sweetness level 4. So initially it was a generous level 4. It's not necessarily the sweetest cup of coffee I've had, but it does have a nice bit of sweetness in it, and as mentioned, as it has cooled down, it's definitely opened up. Definitely a candied sweetness. So I can see the candied mango that they're going for in this. It makes a lot of sense. Citrus level 4. That, however, is the most pronounced characteristic to me. It's that bergamot, which is actually quite vibrant, and I kind of like it. I've actually really liked bergamot for quite a while now in coffees, as long as it's not too dominant. So as long as it's not reaching that level 5 mark, this is like that perfect level 4 where you're like, okay, it's pronounced, it's easy to pick out, distinguishable, and definitely they're present within the cup. Cleanliness level 4. It has actually cleaned itself up a little bit as it has cooled down, so this initial impression I had of this coffee was a little bit more tame and a little bit more kind of murky in terms of the profile, but as it has cooled down and settled, a lot of this has become a lot more defined, definitely getting so much of that citric aspect on the forefront, and then the secondary component being this candied mango, which is definitely there. That's why it gets level 3, but we'll get to that after the finish, which has a pretty nice finish. It definitely has a fair bit of acidity, so you're feeling that citric acidity in the finish too, which is pleasant. I actually quite like the way that it is because it's quite even, so that makes for a more rounded cup of coffee, very much the kind of rounded experience you would expect from an Ethiopian coffee. Alright, Florality level 3 as well, in addition to the acidity. Yeah, it has a slight bit of the floral. It's a little bit more of that kind of herbal florality. It's not too pronounced. I oftentimes feel that when it's aligned with the bergamot flavor note listed on there. Stone fruit, I kind of touched on that earlier, but it is definitely the secondary most characteristic I am experiencing from this coffee. It is nice. It's mostly on the front of the cup, but as it does settle off, you get a lot more of the citric intensity to it. So I wanted that to be the most pronounced characteristic. It just was not for me. Body level 3. This has a lot more body than I think I was expecting, especially for an Ethiopia. So I actually quite like that about the coffee. I think a lot of people know that body isn't the most important factor for a cup of coffee for me. So having it, oftentimes I just like to note it because when it's a little different, it is worth noting. A bunch of level 2s, no smoke really, so that's a level 1. I think for the most part, that's everything really worth discussing. There's just a little bit of extras in this cup of coffee, as mentioned, a slight bit of savoriness, but not too much else worth discussing. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I like it. It goes to show what I've always thought about Corvus. Corvus does a good job. Like, this is a better than average cup of coffee in general, and that's how I've kind of always felt about Corvus, is that they do one of the better cups of coffee in Colorado in general. I consider them to be one of the 3 best coffee roasters in the state by a little bit of a margin too. They've kind of set themselves apart from a lot of the other places in terms of that second tier right behind Sweet Bloom, for me anyway. And this is another one that really demonstrates that, because I think the amount of, I don't know, just overall roundness, how even this cup of coffee is. You get the fruits on the forefront, and then after that it finishes off quite nicely, is an excellent example of the way Ethiopian coffee should be, with an added bit of body. So that kind of leads to the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. It is on the more traditional side of Ethiopia's, even though this is an experimental coffee. I kind of came into it with the impression that maybe it might not be as clean as expected, but this definitely could pass for a wash processed Ethiopia, in the sense that it has the clarity you're looking for. It has a nice bit of sweetness, even if I want the sweetness a little bit more. And it has so much of the fruity aspects and even a fair bit of the florality to it. So yeah, pretty typical in the Ethiopian sense, even if this is supposed to be a more experimental Ethiopia. I think I'll leave this review at that though. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Anasora Intenso Yeast Inoculated Processed Ethiopia from Corvus Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.